You must be out of your mind, my daughter exclaimed when I showed up at her college graduation, holding a flower in hand for her. She said, "Others are getting cars and mansions for their children, and this is what you got for me." Then she took the flower from me and threw it away. What happened after that was rather unexpected, and I wasn't the one going to be shocked. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Simon Maine from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I never thought a single flower could be the reason I changed the course of everything I'd ever planned. But then again, I never thought my daughter. The child I held before she could even open her eyes, the girl I worked double shifts for, missed doctor's appointments and family reunions for, would ever look at me the way she did that afternoon. I used to believe there was a bond between us, something unspoken but deeply rooted, the kind of connection that no amount of teenage angst or generational difference could break. I was wrong, because on the day of her college graduation, I stood outside the ceremony hall, holding a flower in my hand, and realized that I had no idea who she really was anymore. The flower wasn't random. I'd picked it myself that morning from the garden behind the house, a white camellia, pure, quiet, elegant. It was her late grandmother's favorite. Tara used to help me tend that garden when she was little. She'd dig in the dirt with her tiny fingers and ask questions about every plant, every color. She used to laugh when she found worms. Back then, she loved the simple things. She didn't care about money or cars or appearances. Somewhere along the way, that little girl slipped through my fingers, and in her place stood this polished, bitter young woman who had begun to see life as a transaction. So, yes, I brought her a flower. Not because I couldn't afford more, but because I wanted to see what she'd do with it. I needed to know if there was still a trace of that child I once knew. She spotted me before I could wave. She was surrounded by friends, their arms full of gift bags and envelopes. Some guy next to her had just received a Tesla from his parents, wrapped in a red bow, the kind you only see in commercials. Another girl flashed the keys to a new condo like it was a party favor. I didn't come to outshine anyone. I came with something personal, something meaningful. I approached her with a smile and extended the camellia like it was a piece of my heart. "Congratulations, sweetheart," I said. "I'm so proud of you." Her face twisted into something sharp and cold. "You must be out of your mind," she said, loud enough for her friends to hear. Laughter followed, awkward and scattered. She looked at the flower like it was an insult. "Others are getting cars and mansions for their children, and this is what you got for me." Her tone didn't tremble. It sliced. And then, without a second's hesitation, she took the flower from my hand and threw it on the ground. Time slowed down. The people around us faded. I couldn't move. I just stared at the petals scattered on the concrete. They looked like pieces of something fragile and irreplaceable, like something once whole, now ruined by the weight of expectation and pride. I didn't say anything then. I just turned and walked away. I heard one of her friends ask, "Was that your dad?" And her reply was simple, "Yeah, he's cheap." That word echoed louder than anything else. Cheap. Not hardworking. Not devoted. Not even old-fashioned. Just cheap. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my study surrounded by the documents I'd prepared weeks in advance. Everything neat and notarized, signed but not yet handed over. The transfer of ownership for my company, the deed to a new townhouse in her name, the lease on a brand new SUV that was parked in a friend's garage waiting for the right moment. I had imagined her face lighting up when I surprised her at home after graduation. I had rehearsed the speech in my head. How proud I was. How I wanted her to take over the business not because I was tired, but because I believed in her. But none of that made sense anymore. That flower was never just a gift. It was a test. And she failed. At sunrise, I made coffee and waited for her to come home. She finally walked in just before noon, tossing her heels aside and scrolling through her phone. I watched her from the kitchen, letting the silence hang heavy. She didn't look at me, didn't say a word. That was my cue. I called her name once, just once. And when she looked up, I held out the folder. Her brow furrowed, and she came over, confused. "What's this?" she asked, flipping through the pages. Her eyes widened as the reality of what she held settled in. That, I said quietly, was what you were supposed to receive yesterday. The company, the house, the car, everything I've worked for. She froze, mouth slightly open, but I didn't stop. But you showed me who you really are, Tara. You humiliated me over a flower. You mocked something sacred. And in that moment, you proved you don't deserve any of it. Her phone slipped from her hand. Wait, Dad, no. I didn't mean it like that. I was surprised. Everyone else. You showed your character. I interrupted. That's what matters. Not what anyone else did. Not what you expected. You revealed your heart, and it was ugly. She started to cry. Actual tears, not the performative kind. She reached for my arm, and I stepped back. Please, she whispered. I'm sorry, okay? I was just overwhelmed. Her mother came downstairs at the sound of voices. The moment she realized what was happening, she took Tara's side without asking a single question. You're punishing her for being emotional on her graduation day, she said. That's cruel, even for you. I looked at them both, and I felt something inside me settle. Not harden, not turn cold, just settle. She's not getting anything from me, I said, my voice calm but final. And neither of you are going to guilt me into changing that. Tara fell to the floor sobbing. Her mother called me heartless. I walked past them both and locked the folder away. Then I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. We need to revise the will, I said. Take her out. And just like that, the girl I raised became a stranger. I sat alone in the study that evening, the folder tucked away in the locked drawer beside me. The house felt heavier than usual, quieter too, like even the walls were holding their breath, unsure of what I'd do next. The echo of Tara's voice still rang in my ears, her cries, her pleading, the way her fingers had clutched at my sleeve before I pulled away. And beneath all that noise, there was something worse. The deep, cutting realization that everything I had built had been misunderstood. I hadn't wanted to raise a spoiled child. I had wanted to raise a strong, thoughtful woman. But somewhere along the line, those values had twisted, and I was too blind, or too tired, to see it until it was too late. I stared at the fireplace, at the photo of Tara on the mantel in her kindergarten cap and gown, holding a handmade card that read, I love my daddy because he buys me pancakes. That memory used to bring me warmth. Now it only made my chest tighten. I thought about all the birthdays I spent working overtime, trying to get ahead just enough to make her life easier. I remembered the Christmas I skipped dinner to drive 4 hours and close a last-minute deal, so she could have the exact gaming laptop she'd asked for. At the time, I believed sacrifice was love. I still believe that. But now I understand that sacrifice without boundaries becomes resentment. And when love isn't appreciated, it turns into something far more dangerous, disappointment. The truth is, this wasn't just about the flower. It was about everything that came before it, everything I'd ignored because I didn't want to believe it. There were signs. I just refused to see them. Like the time she insulted a waitress for getting her order wrong, and when I pulled her aside to correct her, she rolled her eyes and said, Dad, you don't have to act broke all the time. I chalked it up to immaturity. Or the time she said she'd never date anyone who drove anything less than a BMW. That stung, considering I'd driven a Toyota pickup for 20 years without complaint. I wanted to believe it was just talk, that she'd outgrow it. But now I see, it wasn't talk. It was the foundation she'd been building. A tower of ego. And it finally collapsed under the weight of a single flower. The folder I had shown her was just a glimpse. There were more papers. I opened another drawer and pulled out the sealed envelope with her name written in my handwriting. Inside was a letter I'd written 6 months ago when I first decided to name her the successor of my company. I had poured my heart into that letter, telling her how proud I was, how I saw her potential as a leader, how I hoped she'd bring compassion and integrity to the legacy I had built. Now, I couldn't even bring myself to read it again. I folded it, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it in the shredder without a word. The company had been my life. 32 years of sweat, failure, rebuilding, and stubborn faith. I started it in a garage with nothing but a second-hand desk and a Rolodex of names that barely answered my calls. There were days I ate ramen for dinner and nights I slept under my desk. But I pushed through. And when it finally took off, when we got our first real contract and I saw the number on that check, I remember thinking, one day, this will be Tara's. That dream had kept me going. Through market crashes, lost clients, lawsuits, even health scares, I held on because I believed I was building something for her. For us. Now, it felt like I had been building a monument she never cared to visit. Around midnight, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, something I rarely do, and sat on the back porch watching the wind move through the trees. That garden where I had picked the flower was silent now, the petals asleep, the soil cool. I thought of her grandmother, my mother, who used to say, "Gratitude isn't about saying thank you. It's about how you treat the people who show up when it counts." That woman survived war, poverty, and loss. She raised me with steel in her spine and grace in her heart. I wanted Tara to inherit that strength. But somehow, somewhere between ballet recitals and private tutors, I gave her everything except the one thing that mattered: perspective. I didn't hear Tara come outside until she sat quietly in the chair beside me. She didn't say anything at first, just pulled her knees to her chest like she used to when she was small. The silence between us stretched until it hurt. Then she said, "You were right. I was ungrateful. And I'm sorry." Her voice was low, trembling, not performative, not theatrical, just broken. I looked at her, and for a moment, I saw the little girl again. But only for a moment. I took a deep breath and stared ahead. I didn't want an apology, Tara. I wanted to believe you still had the heart to understand something simple. That love doesn't come wrapped in a bow or parked in a driveway. That a flower, picked by hand, could mean more than a leased luxury car. She wiped her face with her sleeve. I just got caught up in everything. Everyone was watching. I thought you were making a point. I didn't know you had all that waiting for me. That's the point, I said. You shouldn't have needed to know. You should have seen the flower and thought. My dad came to see me. He brought something personal. That should have been enough. It wasn't a trick, Tara. It was a mirror. She reached out and grabbed my hand. I let her, for a minute. But then I pulled away gently. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. I love you. That'll never change. But I can't reward that kind of entitlement. Not after everything. You have to understand, this isn't just about a gift. It's about who you're becoming. And if I hand you everything now, I'll only be confirming that disrespect comes with prizes. It doesn't. She sat still, tears running down her face. So what happens now? I stood, stretched, and looked up at the sky. Now, we both live with the consequences of what we showed each other. I walked back inside and closed the door behind me. The next morning began like any other. Coffee brewing, sunlight slipping through the kitchen blinds, birds chirping in the maple outside the window. But everything else about the house had changed. I could feel it in the air, thick with unspoken blame and restless grief. Tara hadn't come out of her room. Her door was closed, her graduation cap and gown tossed over the stair railing like an afterthought. Her mother, Vanessa, was already waiting for me at the table, arms crossed, a storm sitting quietly in her eyes. I didn't even get to sit down before she started. "You know what you did was cruel," she said, her voice calm but loaded. "You humiliated her." I poured my coffee and took a long sip before answering. I didn't humiliate her. She did that on her own. All I did was give her a flower. Vanessa scoffed and shook her head like I was speaking in riddles. "She's 22, not 60. You know how this generation thinks. Everything is online. Everything's about appearance. You brought a flower when everyone else was giving luxury cars. You set her up, and then you turned it into some kind of moral test. That's not parenting. That's punishment disguised as principle." Her words hit me, not because they were right, but because they were so deeply wrong it stunned me. I stared at her for a moment, searching for some flicker of understanding, but there was none. Just frustration. Just defense. I leaned back in my chair, my voice lower now. "So you're saying we should cater to her ego? Reward her for publicly disrespecting her father? Is that what good parenting looks like to you?" "She's our daughter," Vanessa snapped. "Not a business deal. You don't cut her out of your life over one bad moment." One bad moment. I repeated, stunned. This wasn't a tantrum in a grocery store when she was 5. She's a grown woman. She insulted me, mocked a meaningful gift, and then cried only when she found out what she lost. That wasn't a mistake, Vanessa. That was her showing her character. Vanessa stood abruptly, pacing now. She's been under pressure. College hasn't been easy. Social media, peer pressure, it all gets in their heads. You don't know what it's like for her. And she doesn't know what it's like for me. I snapped. To work 30 years to build something from scratch. To sacrifice every comfort so she could have a chance at something better. And when the moment came to show a little grace, a little appreciation, she threw it on the ground. Vanessa's voice broke. She's still your child. I know, I said quieter now. But that doesn't mean I hand her the world after she spits on it. The room fell silent. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. Two people who had once shared everything now divided by how we saw the same child. I realized something important in that silence. Vanessa and I hadn't just grown apart after the divorce. We'd been raising two different versions of Tara under the same roof. I believed in accountability. She believed in cushioning every fall. And somewhere in between, our daughter learned to play both sides. Later that day, I heard Tara moving around the kitchen. I didn't go down. I stayed in my office, letting her exist without me. But I could hear the sounds: cabinet doors opening, a cereal box rustling, the clink of a spoon against ceramic. Familiar sounds. Domestic. Almost peaceful. But I didn't feel peace. I felt exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion from years of compromise, of quieting my instincts just to keep the household from falling apart. I'd been the bad cop for so long. I didn't even recognize what it meant to simply be a father anymore. Around noon, Vanessa knocked on the office door. She didn't wait for an invitation, just stepped inside, holding her phone. "You should see this," she said. She turned the screen toward me. It was a social media post. Tara's, of course. A photo of the graduation stage. No caption, but the comments were already filling in the blanks. "Where's your car?" One friend joked. "Your dad's a cheapskate," another wrote. But it was Tara's own reply that burned into my chest like a brand. Some parents just don't believe in showing up, even when they're standing right in front of you. I handed the phone back without a word. "That's what she thinks of me," I said finally. "After everything. That I didn't show up." I laughed, cold, bitter. Maybe I was a fool all along. Vanessa didn't say anything. She stood there, unsure, the phone still in her hand. Eventually, she turned and left, her silence louder than any argument. That evening, Mark came by, my oldest friend, the kind of guy who never sugarcoated anything. He had heard about what happened from a cousin who was at the graduation. Small towns never needed social media to gossip. Word spread faster than wildfire. We sat on the back porch, just like we had as teenagers, sneaking beers and dreaming big. "She really threw it?" he asked, when I told him everything. "Didn't even flinch," I said. "Like it was garbage." Mark let out a low whistle and leaned back. "Man, I don't blame you for being pissed. But let me ask you something. Was the flower really a gift? Or was it a trap?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't like the question. Because deep down, I had to admit, maybe part of me had been testing her. Not to be cruel, but because I needed to know. I needed to see, once and for all, whether she was ready. Whether she understood what mattered. Whether she deserved the weight of the legacy I was about to give her. "I don't know," I said finally. "Maybe it was both." Mark nodded slowly. "Sometimes the lesson ain't in what they do. It's in how we respond. You've shown her the cost. Now the question is, are you willing to let her earn it back?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. The next morning, I woke with a clarity that felt colder than peace. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't rage. It was something in between, like that quiet stillness after a storm, where the air still smells of rain and everything feels more fragile than before. I got dressed in silence, the house around me sleeping or pretending to. I didn't bother with breakfast. I walked past the kitchen, past the family photos that now felt like relics of another era, and out the front door with the folder tucked under my arm. It was time. No more questions. No more waiting for someone to change. I was going to rewrite the story, and this time, I would be the author, not the exhausted narrator watching from the sidelines. The drive to my lawyer's office was quiet. No music, no news, just the hum of the road and the slow ache in my chest that pulsed like a bruise. Every red light gave me a moment to think, and every green light pulled me forward, whether I wanted to go or not. I kept seeing her face. Tara's face. On that stage, twisted in embarrassment and anger. And then I saw her the next morning, tears streaming, trying to rewind the moment like it had never happened. But it had happened. And you can't unspill a cup that was meant to be shared with respect. My lawyer, Dennis, greeted me with a slow nod. We'd known each other for over 20 years. He drafted my first will when Tara was 5 and updated it again when Vanessa and I split. He was the kind of man who didn't speak unless it mattered, which is why I respected him. When I handed him the folder and told him I needed to take Tara out of the company succession plan and the will, he raised one eyebrow but said nothing. He only asked one question. "Are you sure?" And I was. I didn't flinch. I didn't second guess. "Yes," I said. "She's not ready. She doesn't value the legacy. I won't put 30 years of work in the hands of someone who treats it like a party favor." Dennis nodded and began typing. The keys clicked slowly, deliberately, like the ticking of a clock winding down the old plan and writing something new. As I sat there watching him, I felt a strange wave of grief, not for the money, not for the business, but for the dream. The dream of handing the baton to someone with pride. The dream of watching her take the company to new heights. The dream of being seen by my child not as a bank account or a background prop, but as a man, a father, a builder. When the documents were ready, I signed them without ceremony. Just my name, over and over, until it no longer felt like mine. By the time I walked out of that office, Tara was officially removed from every asset, every title, every plan I'd once drawn with her initials etched into the margins. It felt like amputating a part of myself to save the whole. On the way home, I stopped at the cemetery where my parents were buried. I hadn't been there in over a year. Life gets busy. Grief gets heavy. But today, it felt necessary. I stood between their headstones, Dad on the left, Mom on the right, and let the wind fill the space around me. The sky was overcast, and the air smelled like cut grass and old stone. I knelt down, brushed a few leaves off their names, and just spoke softly into the silence. "I tried," I said. "I really did. I gave her everything. I thought if I just worked hard enough, provided enough, loved her the way you taught me to, that she'd grow up grateful, that she'd carry what I built with pride. But somewhere along the way, she started thinking love was measured in price tags and followers." I swallowed hard. My throat tightened. I didn't raise her that way. I swear I didn't. But maybe I looked the other way too many times. Maybe I confused giving with parenting. Maybe I just wanted to be the dad who never said no because I knew how much it hurt when the answer was always no growing up. I sat down on the bench nearby, my hands folded like I was in church. And maybe I was. A church of regrets. A cathedral of could-have-beens. A voice behind me broke the quiet. "You always talk to them like that." It was Mark, of course. Somehow, he always knew when to show up unannounced, and exactly when I needed someone to witness my worst thoughts without judgment. I nodded. Sometimes I don't know who else to say these things to. He sat beside me and didn't speak for a while. We just watched the trees sway. Birds landed, pecked at the grass, flew off. Life moving forward, as it always does. "You think she's lost for good?" he finally asked. I sighed. "I don't know. But she's lost right now. And I can't risk everything I've worked for on a maybe." He scratched his chin, the way he always did when weighing something heavy. "You ever think about giving her one more shot? Not everything. Not the whole kingdom. Just a piece. See what she does with it." I shook my head. "That's not how this works, Mark. This isn't Monopoly money. This is my life. My name. My sacrifices. You don't get do-overs when the stakes are this high." Mark nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Not because he disagreed, but because he still believed in the possibility of change. Maybe I did too, but I wasn't about to bet my legacy on it. Later that night, back home, I took out a journal I hadn't touched in years. It had Tara's name engraved on the front, a gift I once planned to fill with letters and hand to her on her wedding day. I flipped through the empty pages until I found the first clean sheet. And I wrote, "You may never understand why I did what I did. But one day, when you've lived enough and lost enough, I hope you'll see that boundaries are not abandonment. They're the last act of love we offer when every other attempt has failed." I closed the book, placed it in the drawer beside my bed, and turned off the light. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply accepted what was. The rewrite was done. Now all that remained was living with it. I should have known it wouldn't stay private. Not in this family. Not in this world. By the end of that week, the decision I made in a quiet lawyer's office had morphed into a wildfire, leaping across dinner tables, group chats, and Sunday brunches like gossip on gasoline. It started with my sister, Cheryl, who, true to form, acted like the family historian and town crier all rolled into one. She called me 3 times that Sunday. I ignored the first 2. The third came with a text that said, "You owe me an explanation." I picked up, not because I owed her anything, but because I was curious how fast the news had traveled. The moment I answered, she didn't even say hello. "You disinherited your daughter?" she snapped, voice rising like a kettle left too long on the stove. "What the hell is wrong with you, Marcus?" I leaned against the counter, holding the phone away from my ear for a moment. "Hello to you too, Cheryl. I'm doing fine. Thanks for asking." "Don't get cute with me," she hissed. "You think people aren't talking?" The whole family chat is lit up. Even Aunt Denise chimed in, and she hasn't texted since Obama left office. "I made a choice," I said evenly. "One I don't have to explain to anyone who wasn't in the room when she threw a flower on the ground like it was trash." There was a pause, then a scoff. "You gave her a flower, Marcus. She just graduated college. You know how that looked." "I know how it felt," I snapped. "Like watching your child spit on your heart because it didn't come with a bow on top." Silence again, longer this time. But Cheryl was never one to back off. "You always did like playing the martyr," she muttered. "You act like everything you do is righteous just because you suffered more than the rest of us. But maybe, just maybe, this time, you're punishing her because you can't control her anymore." Her words hit me like ice water. Not because they were true, but because I knew she believed them. I realized, in that moment, that no one outside this house would ever really understand what happened. They'd hear the headline, not the story. "Father cuts off daughter for rejecting flower." It was simpler that way, easier to digest. But simple doesn't mean honest. By Monday, Tara's post had gained traction. It started with a vague caption over a selfie in her cap and gown. "Not all parents are proud. Some just show up to hurt you one last time." It had hundreds of likes within the hour. I only knew because one of my employees brought it to my attention, concerned. I read every word, every comment. Some were from friends. Some were from strangers. That's heartbreaking. You deserve better. Parents like that don't realize the damage they cause. I stared at the screen, numb. It didn't matter that none of them knew me. It didn't matter that they only had one side. What mattered was that my daughter, the person I built my life around, had chosen to paint me as a villain for a digital audience before ever trying to understand my reasons. That night, the doorbell rang. It was Mark again. He held up a 6-pack and gave me a crooked smile. "Figured you'd need one." We sat on the porch in silence for a while. He scrolled through his phone, shaking his head. "You know she posted that thing, right?" "Yeah," I muttered. "I saw it. She's hurting, man." "I'm hurting too." Mark nodded. "I know, but one of you is still the parent." I clenched my jaw. "Don't do that. Don't pull the be the bigger man card. I was the parent. For 22 years. And look where it got me." He took a long sip of beer. "Still doesn't mean you're wrong. But you can be right and still lose." I didn't answer. I didn't want to admit how much I feared that was exactly what was happening. That I was standing on principle. Yes, but maybe on an island too. I hadn't spoken to Tara in days. Vanessa had moved out temporarily, claiming she needed space, which was her way of saying, "You've pushed us both too far." I was alone in the house I built, with the echo of memories I didn't know how to mourn. Every room reminded me of something. Her first steps in the hallway, her drawings still magnet to the fridge, the broken banister I never fixed because she liked to slide down it like a playground. Now it all felt like a museum to a family that no longer existed. The next morning, I went into the office early. I buried myself in work, contracts, budgets, performance reviews, anything that didn't require me to feel. Around lunchtime, Janine, my assistant of 15 years, knocked on my door. She was holding an envelope. "This came in for you," she said gently. From her. I took it without a word. She hovered, like she wanted to say more, but thought better of it. When she left, I stared at the envelope for a long time. Her handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Round, neat, slightly slanted. I remembered helping her learn to write her name. tracing it over and over until she didn't need my hand under hers. Now here it was again. Still hers. Still mine. But something had changed. I opened it slowly, afraid of what I'd find. Inside was a letter. No dramatic apology. No manipulative plea. Just raw honesty. I can't take back what I said. Or how I acted. I was embarrassed and angry and didn't know how to handle any of it. I thought the flower meant you'd stop trying. I didn't know it was the last try. I understand now why you did what you did. I don't agree with it. But I see it. And I miss you. That's all. I folded it, placed it in the drawer, and sat back in my chair. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even enough to start a real conversation. But it was something. A crack in the wall. A thread still hanging. And I didn't know what to do with it. I used to think closure was something you reached. Like a destination on a map, clearly marked and waiting with open arms. But in the weeks that followed Tara's letter, I realized closure isn't a finish line. It's a choice. It's a boundary you draw in the sand after your heart's been cracked open one too many times. Some days, it looks like forgiveness. Other days, it looks like silence. And on the hardest days, it's simply waking up and deciding not to rewrite history just because someone else regrets how they played their part. The letter stayed in my desk drawer, unopened after that first read. I never responded. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that caring didn't mean returning to what had already been broken beyond repair. The house was quieter now. Vanessa never moved back in. She called once or twice to check in, but the warmth between us had long cooled. We had drifted apart years ago, held together only by the shared gravity of parenthood. And now that gravity had collapsed. Sometimes I'd see Tara's social media posts pop up, pictures with friends, a new apartment, the occasional vague caption about growing pains or learning lessons. I never liked or commented. I didn't stalk her pages like some tortured father waiting for a breadcrumb trail. But I saw enough to know she was surviving. Maybe even starting to see the world through a different lens. But I also knew I couldn't be the one to guide her through that anymore. There were moments, brief, fleeting, when doubt crept in. When I asked myself if I had been too harsh, too final. When I'd wake up from dreams where she was 7 again, running through the backyard barefoot, asking me to push her higher on the swing. In those dreams, she always turned to look at me, eyes wide with that unfiltered trust children have. And every time I reached for her, she vanished. I'd wake up with my hand in the air, the ache so real it pressed down on my chest like a weight. But I never let those dreams rewrite the reality. Because the truth is, I didn't walk away from Tara. She stepped over the line. And when I stood firm, she mistook it for abandonment instead of the boundary it was. One Saturday, I found myself standing in the garden again. It had been weeks since I last tended it, and the neglect was obvious. Overgrown hedges, browning leaves, the flower beds choking on weeds. I grabbed the gloves and shears from the shed and started cutting back everything that had grown wild in my absence. There was something therapeutic in it, snipping away the parts that no longer served a purpose, making space for something new to grow. That's when I saw it. Another white camellia, blooming against all odds, tucked behind a cluster of ivy. Not the same one I picked for Tara, but nearly identical. Pristine, untouched, and somehow, it felt like a message from the universe. A reminder that life continues, whether it's witnessed or not. I sat on the porch with the flower in my hand, turning it gently between my fingers. So small, so delicate, and yet it had survived the heat, the storms, the neglect. That's what I wanted for my daughter. Not a punishment, not a grudge, but a reckoning that would make her stronger. I didn't want her to crumble under rejection. I wanted her to realize that love isn't always soft. Sometimes it's sharp. Sometimes it's wrapped in disappointment and tied with consequences. And the sooner she learned that, the better chance she had at not repeating the same mistakes with someone else. A few days later, I got a text from my niece, Cheryl's daughter, Lila. She was 24, fresh out of grad school, and had always looked at me like I hung the moon. Uncle Marcus, the message read, I heard about everything. I just want you to know that not everyone sees you as the villain. Some of us understand. And we're still proud of you. That message hit harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear it. Not because I doubted my decision, but because the loneliness of standing firm can sometimes feel like punishment in itself. But in that moment, I realized something important. Legacy isn't just about inheritance. It's about influence. And maybe the impact I had wouldn't come through bloodlines or business shares, but through the example I set, even when it hurt. Weeks turned into months. The business thrived. I handed more responsibility to my COO, took Fridays off, and started mentoring young entrepreneurs in the community. Men and women who reminded me of myself at 30, hungry, unsure, desperate to build something that mattered. I told them the truth, not the glossed-up version. I told them that building something great takes more than money. It takes values. And you don't just pass those down with a check. You pass them down through how you live, through what you accept, through the standards you refuse to lower, even for the people you love the most. One evening, I was speaking at a local business panel. After the talk, a young man approached me and said, "You mentioned your daughter in your speech. Do you think you'll ever reconcile?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to say it without anger or grief. Just truth. "I hope so," I told him, "but only if it's built on respect, not regret." And that's where I stand today. No dramatic reunion, no tearful makeup hug, just life, quiet, steady, and grounded in the hardest decision I've ever made. I still love Tara. I always will. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's fear wearing a disguise. And I'm not afraid anymore. Not of being misunderstood. Not of being alone. And certainly not of standing by the values that shaped everything I am. I didn't pick another flower. I left that one blooming, untouched. Because some things don't need to be picked. They just need to be seen. And if she ever walks back into this garden, on her own, ready, changed, it'll be waiting. Just like me. Have you ever had to draw a line with someone you love, even when it tore you apart inside? Do you believe tough love can be the most honest kind? Drop your thoughts in the comments, whether you agree or not. These stories are raw, but they're real, and your voice matters more than you think. If this story made you feel something, like, share, and subscribe for more deeply personal stories that speak to the heart and never shy away from the hard truths. See you soon in the next one.